Wow.
I mean, if you're not
That's
impressed by that, I don't know.
no,
I don't know why. If you're not impressed by that, I don't know what you're impressed
that
by.
was very impressive.
I'm
I
kidding.
feel
That
like
was
you spoiled the movie for me. That should have been a spoiler alert.
that really ruined everything. It's gorgeous. I mean, it just the drama, the action. Yeah. It took me I spent a long time working on that.
Should have seen it in the movie theaters.
But he would have been surround sound. You need all that stuff. We talk about all the different labels, right? If you're just getting in, because it's tough. Like I think when I first started, I didn't know about the different levels and layers, and we don't have conserved on here, but I have it. Don't worry, I have it solo. I collected a couple of restored comics, and I realized later on, I was like, why do I want no? I didn't. I was like, oh, color. What is color touch? But I'd love to go over the from an expert's point of view, the different variations, obviously. And so obviously the main one that we see is universal, right? The blue label. And that basically just means it's like untouched, right? It's original shape, and it
Right.
hasn't been messed with at all. And
Right. At this point, though, do we presume your audience knows how the grades work?
no, that's another segment for another time,
Yes,
I
I think
think.
that's going to get too complicated. So there are several grading companies in the market, but most people know CGC. And the reason I mention that is because CBCS is a rival to CGC. They were started by the same person. So he left CGC and went and
Steve
right,
Borak.
yeah, started CBCS. And collectors, the interesting thing about it is that collectors have a very high opinion of CBCS's product. They say that it's well graded, it's consistent. The cases are better than CGC's cases. Though I still think there's room for improvement in all areas of this hobby when it comes to the actual slabs. But we can talk about that another day. But what CBCS did, I think, did wrong was at the beginning they didn't differentiate their covers, their labels, the way that CGC does. So when you see a color of CGC, you don't need to read the label to know what state that book is.
Yeah.
So blue is universal. Then you have yellow, which means signature series, which means and it's just very specific. The way that you can't take that book that Stan signed to Dan to CGC and say, give this a yellow label. They have to witness the signature.
Yeah.
So it's sad in a way because there will be lots of signed copies of books from before CGC existed by people like Jack Kirby that will never be in a yellow holder because CGC didn't witness it. But in a sense, at least the rule exists for a reason, right? So that it takes fakes out of the market. If you buy a yellow label, that the person who signed it was witness signing it. It's real. So collectors do put some stock in that. Then you have, there's one missing from your collection there, but I'll tell you about that in a second. Then you have purple labels, which people call PLOD, purple label of death. So when you get a plod, when you get your CGC invoice and you're looking down at the grades, getting excited about what grade the book's got, and you see a purple label of death, you're like, oh,
it's the worst feeling. I got it recently. I mean, and this will be good because it involves golden. I had my ASM 50 that I had been sitting on for a while, hung up, not graded. I sent it in with a few other things to CGC. I was like, all right, yeah, and again, like it's it's a shame. And I think who knows if the seller knew, color touch is really, really, it's not super hard to detect, but at the same time for novices, like I can't call it out. Right. And so I sent it in and came back a 6.5 restored. And I was like, oh, it was the worst feeling ever. I will say fast forward, I did sell it. And then you guys had I think a 6 or 6.5 and I got it. And I was like, all right, cool. I'm good to go now. But yeah, it is the worst feeling when you get it back. It's a terrible feeling. And if you try to get, so CGC will sometimes, it's very expensive, but will sometimes try to remove restoration. And it's ridiculously expensive. And if they can't do it or screen it and won't do it, you'll just get back in your line of like your status. It'll just say, do not encapsulate. And that's another sign of death where you're like, all right, they're just charging me, and they're gonna send me the book back and be like, sorry, no removal or restoration. So yeah, it's awful.
Yeah, well, you should try being a dealer and buying a collection based on the value of one really big book that turns out to be restored. That that I
Mm.
mean, it's a bad feeling no matter what, whether you're a collector, dealer, whatever. But if you've basically spent, let's say, $20,000 because you're buying a collection, and like there's an AF-15 and a bunch of other stuff, but the AF-15 is worth 90% of the value, and that comes back restored.
Mm.
That is a killer. You literally lose money on the
Yeah.
deal. Nobody really wants it after that. I mean, less people want it. It's yeah, your entire projection for that deal is messed up by that fact that you get a PLOD. And so yeah, purple labels are the ones you really don't want to see. Then there's the interesting.
And there's different layers of purple, right? I mean,
Well,
color
there's
touch
the
is.
really interesting crossover between signed restored books,
Oh, with the purple
stripy
in the
purple and
background. Yeah,
stripy
yeah. I
yellow.
didn't pull that up, but that is. I think it might be on the main image. Yeah, signature
Yeah,
series
down there.
restored.
So you got like a purple stripe on the top, and then the rest of it is yellow. So yeah, I guess I don't
That's a
know.
weird one.
That would be an interesting field to collect. Restored signature series books. That would be a very interesting like sub niche to collect. Then you mentioned there's conserved, and there's quite a lot of
No, that's pedigree.
that's
Sorry, I
pedigree.
pulled the wrong one. Ah, I don't have conserved in here. You are right.
No, there's another one you missed. But so there's conserve grade, which is a little controversial because a lot of the reasons they mention something is conserved could also be justification for giving it a restored grade. Like
Mm-hmm.
staples reinforced. I'm trying to remember, like cover cleaned or interior cleaned, and
Leaf casting is a thing, right?
yeah.
Where it's like instead of. Oh, sorry, I was gonna let you
No,
go.
no, I didn't know what recasting was, so I was actually listening.
Oh, leaf
Oh, leaf
casting.
cut.
Yeah, leaf casting is. I've seen it because I follow someone. I'm actually pulling up a conserve label right now, which is the beauty of Restream. So to my knowledge, leaf casting is it's like it's something that will keep the pages in the book together,
No.
but it's not actual paper. So you can put it in water and it just dissolves. And so it's actually, I don't know why they can say, I don't know as much about it, but I follow, so yeah, tear seals on cover, which is interesting because to your point, you said, like, I feel like tear seals being conserved could be, yeah, it's really a fine line between conserved and restored. But
What's so
leaf casting, I
fascinating
think, is
about
a,
the example you just put on the screen is it's from 1992. Who
yeah,
would bother?
yeah,
Who would bother to do that?
yeah.
Like, I really like. I imagine a golden age book or something. So yeah, the whole point of conserve grade is that an attempt has been made to keep the book in the condition it's in for much longer. Like, for example, if the staples in a book are really rusted, then that's not going to end well because the book is just going to get bled into from the rusted
Mm,
staples. It's going to get worse and worse. It's going to bloom. Like, imagine a really slow blooming of the rust that's going to
mm,
stain more and more of the paper over the years. So if you remove the staples from a book and replace them, that could get a conserve grade. And
mm.
that'd be noted on the cover that the staples being replaced. I mean, a really smart guy would find an original from the same series and just switch the staples.
That's smart.
They would still probably detect that, but at least the staples would be original. They wouldn't be like contemporary. Um, I don't know. Like I find the
So
concern.
I just looked up leaf casting. So
Okay.
basically, it's been around for a while in conservation. So I think what it is you've told me in the past like you hate brittle pages. I think what it's supposed to do is to your point with like the same thing with the staples. It is a natural kind of thing to hopefully stop the deterioration of the pages. And I've seen people. It's fascinating. I wish I had photos. There's one on Instagram, Sanderson Studios, who does a lot of conservation and he's really interesting. I live for his posts because he will show he gets like the highest of the highest, like the Batman ones, and he gets them in and they'll be sent to him. And he's a really, you could tell he's a fan of the hobby, like the way he talks, and he's really he's good for the hobby, and he posts everything he does, and it's mesmerizing. And when they do the leaf casting before they trim it down, like they'll have like 2 pages that are maybe split and whatever separated. It's almost like baking a cake. Like you'll see the pages and they blend them into this one large like sheet. You know, like those cards that are pre-cut, like the trading cards. It's almost like that. And then I think they, you know, they'll trim it to kind of send to get whatever. But I think essentially it's to stop the deterioration. But it's really interesting the way they do it. And so it's
I'd
yeah,
love you to share that with me sometime, because I'd like to watch that. I haven't come across that before.
Let me see if I can pull something up on Instagram while I have you talk about qualified grades. Another fun one.
Yeah, qualified grades interesting too, and it can be a bit controversial because it's not consistent sometimes. So there are books that will get a 0.5 incomplete grade, and that will be universal. So it'll be blue label, but a 0.5. And even if the book looks really nice, but it's missing something significant. So it might be missing a page, or like a whole wrap, or a coupon, or there's, you know, in that collection I described earlier, there's someone's cut pieces out of these different pages. It seems random between CGC determining this is a 0.5 or CGC determining this is a qualified higher grade. Good example, Hulk 181 is often missing the Marvel stamp. 1 in 3 or so are missing the Marvel stamp. You will get a qualified grade every time. You'll never get a 0.5 because the stamp is missing. So you get a high grade Hulk 181 that looks great, apart from the fact it's missing the stamp. It will get that high grade, but with a green label saying incomplete, Marvel's value stamp missing from page whatever, 18, whatever it is. So yeah, the green one is a little strange because it's not just incomplete books that get green labels. Sometimes errors get green labels, and I have no idea why they do this. And I will keep beating this drum until CGC changes this. But there are some errors in the hobby, and more are being discovered as people actually study comic books more and more, that CGC determines is a qualified grade. Another example sometimes of the green label is if someone signed it.
And it wasn't
witnessed. The signature makes a big difference.
And this is a good example. So it's name written on cover. So sometimes you'll see it with like Stan Lee too.
Right.
If it wasn't witnessed, it'll say Stan Lee written on cover in pen or mark, which is it's disappointing because you're like, you know, it's his signature. You can look at it and you're like, that's definitely Stan's signature, but they didn't witness it, so they won't label it.
Yeah, and so the qualified thing around errors is a bad mistake by CGC that they need to rectify, because some errors get a green label and some errors get a universal label. So which is it? Look, it's not
so inconsistent.
It's a production error. It really is printer's waste that should have been destroyed, but somehow survived and has ended up in a CGC holder. And it should be universal. There's nothing qualified about the fact, except that, you know, the foil is missing from the front of a Venom Lethal Protector 1, or the Fantastic Four, the ink was the wrong color on the cover of issue 110. That's a universal all day long, by the way. When you see one of those, it's always in a universal holder. However, I think it's Spawn 1 that has black ink missing and the numbers missing from the front.
I've seen those, yeah.
And that's a green label. And what the heck is going on? Like, figure this out. Like, it's
so inconsistent.
So there's that. But the ones you've missed, actually.
Like I found some leaf casting examples. So here's a little. This is a before.
Oh yeah.
So I think that this was a Smash Comics one he was working on. And so this is what leaf casting looks like before they get to working on it. So he's just leaf casted it, and then it's like that. So you see, it's kind of like almost like an uncut. It's, you know, like there's the extra, and then I think, you know, I don't know if you're allowed to trim it down or what, but there was a whole explanation. We could have a whole episode on this one day. He talked about trying to follow the grains of the paper, and again, like to my knowledge, it's supposed to blend in and stop the deterioration, but to my knowledge, if you were to throw that into some solution or whatever, all the leaf casting will dissolve and it'll just go back to that. So it's not actually paper, even though paper probably dissolves. That paper's that old, that brittle dissolves, but it's fascinating. Look, it's almost like a raw, uncut sheet. It's really interesting. So I'm always fascinated by the leaf casting with conservation. I think it's another art form, right? And so it's really interesting.
Yeah,
So yeah.
the restoration of manuscripts and books is well established. You know, it's interesting because CGC has created its own set of rules, and CBCS kind of has to follow the same rules. The other thing about CBCS holders that frustrates me is that all the labels are the same color. I mentioned that a little bit earlier, but imagine how frustrating that is at a distance. So if you're looking at a listing online in a CBCS holder, you can't tell if it's restored or not until you actually get into like the zoom, and then
Yeah.
you realize, oh, that's why it's 10 grand underpriced, because it's a restored one. Which you never make that mistake if it was a different color, because you just instantly see it. But coming back to CGC, they created their own set of rules. So, for example, in a market where they don't certify things, for example, original art of comic books is not. No one slabs that. So you can have that restored, and quite often people do. They're often discolored. They often go kind of orangey brown,
Okay.
because they've been stored badly, or the paper had a certain tint to it or whatever. And there are people who will restore that art for you, who, I don't know if they bleach it, what they do, whatever they do to it, they make it brighter and it loses that orangey color. And art collectors don't go, oh, that's been restored. There's no restoration as such in the art world. There are things that people don't like, which is like stats, which is almost like a photocopy that's been put over the original art in certain places. They often did that with the titles, so the artist wouldn't have to redraw the title every month. It doesn't make sense, right? So just photocopy it, put a style,
Yeah, I've seen those.
and they put that over the top, and the rest of it's original. And some people don't like that as much, and especially if the characters are photostats, they don't like that as much. They're not as worth as much as one that hasn't got stats. But even so, there's no process by which you determine, oh, a piece of original art has been restored or not. The one you missed is a red label. And
I didn't have I had a no grade label, which is a cover
okay,
list.
yeah, we can talk about
I
that
did not
too.
have the red one though. I did not have a red one. I had the no grade, which is basically if you have the book and without a cover. We see that a lot with AF-15 and other books too.
There's also the single pages, which are no grades.
Yes.
And somebody also bought a piece of Action One, the A from Action One,
That's the dumbest
in
thing.
a no grade holder for 10 grand or something like, which is crazy. Yeah. So yes. So the
The red label.
red
What's the
label
red
was the
label?
old. We haven't talked about the old labels either. CGC changed the style of their labels. So the very
Okay.
early ones had a totally different style. It was actually quite hard to read the grade. It was much smaller font, and those are considered to be a kind of a gambler's niche, because quite often back in the day you could crack those out of the old labels and resubmit them and get a bump in grade, because the style of grading has changed over the years. They don't count the page quality quite the same way as they used to. Things used to get much harsher treatment in the early days. The grades would be much harsher. The color of the pages would be much harsher graded, and quite often you can crack out an old label, get it certified, and it'll come back with a higher grade and better page quality, because the way
That's
the plan has
crazy.
changed. Anyway, so in the old days there was a red label, which was a modern grade, and they've stopped doing that now. It's all the same color. The universal's universal, but yeah, the red ones were modern grades.
That's so
I
silly.
don't know why they changed it. I guess people just said, "Well, why is there a red label? I don't understand," and it's confusing. Yeah, it's confusing. And I guess maybe when they changed the rules of what modern meant, because now it's 1975 and it used to be 1980 or 85. Yeah, I don't know. The red labels, I never liked them, so I don't miss them. But that's CGC labels by color.